Hello and welcome to the Level 1 training on understanding and operating the TC1 vision mixer that we use here within the Cadman TV Studio. This video will aim to cover all of the basic level information for operating the unit, where we will cover a range of areas from navigating the system and setting up sessions to basic operation during a broadcast. The video will be split up into multiple chapters to allow you to more easily navigate through the content if you wish to learn about a specific element. Once the system has been switched on and has performed its initial booting up process, you will be asked to sign in and provide a password. This can be found on the desk in front of the control surface. Once logged in, you will then see the home screen for the system, where initially you will see a countdown in the top left corner where the system is trying to load us into the last used session. Please do not allow it to do this. To stop it, you simply need to press a key on the keyboard or click a button on the mouse. Within the home screen on the system, we can then create a new session from scratch if we don't already have one, open sessions, access the additional software on the system for managing the various support software such as NDI Access Manager and Panasonic cameras. However, you won't be required to look at these at this stage. This will be covered in a later video. The help menu, which allows us to access documentation related to the technology. And finally, the shutdown option, which is where we can turn off or restart the system. Please do not go into the administration mode, as any tampering within this area can cause catastrophic results and result in the equipment being out of action. If this is your first time using the system, then you will more than likely need to create a new session to use for your broadcasts. Select New Session from the list and start by giving it an appropriate name. Then under Session Settings, select HD Template from the drop-down box. It is important that you use this when creating a new session, as this has already been pre-configured to include all of the various video sources for the space, along with the audio routing. Creating the session without this will then require you to manually set all of this up, which is a lengthy and difficult process. Your video settings can then be seen here. You then just need to hit Start Session, which after a short wait will then take you through to the session page. From here, I can then launch into the session and begin setting up for my broadcast, create basic graphic templates using some of the additional software on the system called Live Text. This will be covered in a later video, and manage media content associated with that session. If I click the back arrow, it will return me to the main home screen. If you are a returning user and already have a session set up, then selecting the Open Session option from the list will display all current sessions on the system. It is important that you do not open and use the HD template, as any changes made within this will then apply to any newly created sessions when selecting it as a template. Simply select your session to go into the session page again, then hit Start Live Production. The system will then load into the session, which can take anywhere up to a minute to fully initialize. Once the session is loaded, you will then see the interface split across the various displays connected to the system, the number of which is dependent on the studio that you are using. The Esports Hub, London Arena and Cadman Studios utilise 3 screens. The monitor directly in front of the control surface being the main GUI, otherwise known as the general user interface, and the 2 wall-mounted screens acting as multi-views. Providing all of the cameras and other devices are switched on and connected correctly, you should then be able to see the range of video feeds for those inputs. The number of feeds again being dependent on the studio. The Cadman TV Studio vision mixer can take up to 16 inputs, not all of which are being used. Let's cover the GUI first, starting with the dashboard located along the top of the screen. I won't cover every option located here, only the ones that you need to be aware of at this stage. Under File, I can eject connected storage devices, import media, and exit the session back to the system's home screen. Under Options, I have the ability to enable Click on Viewport to show on program, which is another method for switching between your sources. We'll look at this in more detail on the section for basic operation. Within macros, I have the ability to create and manage macros for the system and session, which are powerful tools that allow me to carry out difficult and complicated instruction sets. This is covered in a later video. The Workspaces option is where we can change the layout of the various multi-views. This is saved to that specific session, so if you wish to customise how your multi-views look, then feel free to do so, as this won't affect other users. We'll cover this in the next chapter. Over here, we then have the ability to export out any recordings made to any of the connected storage devices, as well as setting up our streams and recordings. Below the dashboard, we then have the monitoring area, which is one of our 3 multi-views, this being multi-view 1. In its current layout, we can see monitors showing a combination of sources for both inputs and internal media players, as well as our MEs. Then to the right of those, we have monitors for our preview and program. Underneath that, we then have our mix effect area, or ME for short. MEs are a powerful feature that can be used to act as either a mixer for switching between sources, much like our main switcher panel, which we'll cover next, or they can be set up as effects and used to layer up multiple sources together within a single source, like what you can see here. Again, this is covered in a later video. You can show and hide the ME area by left-clicking whichever ME is selected along this row. Below that, we then have the live control area, which allows us to operate the main switcher bus, which controls what is seen in both the preview and program monitors. This is covered in basic operation later in the video. Finally, at the bottom of the screen, we have our tabbed modules area, which is where we can open and manage our internal media players, buffers, and access the internal audio channels within the mixer. Most of the course setup for the session has already been done by using the HD template as the template when creating this session, as all of the settings, session-specific macros, and media content are copied over. However, you may wish to adapt the layout of the multi-views, and you will need to ensure the recording and streaming settings are accurate. Let's start by looking at how we can configure the multi-views. Clicking Workspaces along the dashboard will then list all of the multi-views connected to the system. Multi-view 1 is found within the GUI on the primary monitor. Then, depending on how many additional displays you have connected, your other multi-views will then be visible below that. Each multi-view option has 2 presets, A and B, which can be adapted as necessary. The system remembers the configuration for future use. This allows you to jump between 2 different layouts depending on how you are operating during your broadcast. If you wish to change the layout configuration for one of these presets, select either A or B, then hover over Load Default to see a list of alternatives. Selecting one of these then loads that configuration into that preset. To change what each monitor within that multi-view is linked to, right-clicking on that slot will then display a list of different options for the various sources and outputs within the Vision Mixer. So if I wish to have this monitor display one of my many inputs, hovering over that option then allows me to select a specific input from the list. Now we've set up the multi-views, let's look at the stream and record settings. Next to each button, you have a cog icon which allows you to access that feature's settings. Clicking on the one for stream and encode opens a floating window where we have 2 configurable H.264 encoders that can be accessed by clicking on their associated cog icon. Within this window, I can then customize the quality of the feed. Depending on what this particular feed is being streamed to, it is recommended that you research the platform's recommended bitrate so not to create any technical issues, as high bitrates can cause excess buffering for the viewer, and if set really high, overload the network, resulting in the feed not reaching its destination. Once your encoders are then set up, you then just need to assign what it is to be used for by ticking the relevant box next to the options listed on the right, such as YouTube or Twitch. Each of these options can again be configured by hovering over it and clicking on the cog icon. So if I wish to use Twitch, by selecting the cog icon for it, from here I can then click Login and enter my details. When prompted, you then need to authorize the system to access your account in order for it to be streamed to. Be aware, these accounts are shared across all sessions on the system, so it's important that you remember to log out of your account after you have finished to prevent any unauthorized access. You add additional platforms to the list by clicking on the new preset drop-down box and selecting the appropriate service from the list. To set up the record feature, you need to hover over the program monitor and select the cog icon that appears in the bottom right corner. From this window, I then select the record tab and ensure that Mix 1 is ticked and give the recording an appropriate name, being sure not to use any special characters. The path specifies where this file will be recorded to, which can be seen by hovering over the file path. It's worth noting that the native recording format is quite large, so you will more than likely need to transcode the recording once finished into a more size-friendly format. Both the stream and record features can then be started by clicking the buttons on the dashboard. We'll now look at how you can import and set up media assets that you have created into your session. To do this correctly, ensure that you have already loaded into your session, and then from the dashboard, select File, Import Media. From within this new window, you then need to select Add, which will then open the media browser window, and from here, providing you have your external storage device with the assets on connected, click Browse to open File Explorer where I can navigate to my device. Select your items and hit Open. Those items will then be listed here. I can also choose whether or not I wish to have any clips or stills from the list added to a specific media player within the session. For now, I'll keep these unticked. We then have two options for importing the files. Fast import, which should only be used whilst you are not broadcasting, as this method requires more of the system's resources, so it can affect the performance and cause issues with the transmission. If you're not broadcasting, then feel free to use this method. If you do require to import media files whilst broadcasting, then you should use the standard import option. When either is clicked, each item will then begin importing and will display a progress bar. Back within the GUI, down in the tabbed modules area, we then need to decide how we would like to split up our content across the different media players. Within the TC1, we have two DDRs and two graphics players. DDR stands for Digital Disc Recorder and allows us to play out videos, stills, graphical items created within live text, and audio files. So these act as your primary media players. The graphics players only support stills and graphical assets created in live text. How you use these media players though to divide up your content is up to you. Both systems have a sound media player for just playing out audio files. All of the media players excluding sound work in exactly the same manner and have the same options, which we'll cover now. To import items into a media player, select the plus symbol in the bottom left corner for that player. This then opens the media browser window, where on the left hand side we have our destinations under the different categories for clips, stills, titles, etc. Depending on what you imported in, you then need to select the name of your session under the relevant category, where you can then see the imported files listed under the section header Received. Select the clips and hit OK. Once you have all of the media files loaded into that media player, you then need to set them out into the correct running order. This is done simply by clicking and dragging an item to the desired place. A white bracket icon indicates where the file will be placed. Once all of your items have been arranged, you then need to ensure the first item that you wish to play out is selected and queued up by single clicking on it. The first frame of that file will then be visible within the monitor for that media player. Along the bottom of the media player, we then have our timeline for the selected clip, which when played will show a square representing the playhead, moving along the bar, and underneath that we have the remaining duration before playback finishes. When there is over 10 seconds of playback, the bar remains blue. Below 10 it turns yellow, and below 5 it turns red, which is a useful indicator so that the operator can communicate this with any presenters. Situations may arise where media files within one of your media players need to be cut down at either the start, end, or both. This can be achieved by using the Set In and Set Out buttons by placing the playhead at the point you wish to make the cut, or alternatively you can use the I and O keys on the keyboard. We also have our playhead controls for skipping between items forwards or backwards, play and stop, and loop, which will either play the same item over and over or the entire playlist depending on how it is set up. This next icon represents single and playlist mode. Left unchecked, the media player will only play out the selected clip. However, if selected, it will now play out the selected item, followed by all of the remaining items within the playlist until it reaches the end of the playlist or this option is switched off. Finally, we then have the autoplay feature, which when selected, it will begin playout automatically when that particular media player is sent to program. Upon reaching the end of the clip, it will then automatically transition to whatever is selected on preview, using the selected transition. It also queues up the next item in the playlist. If you don't have this selected, then playback will not begin automatically upon being sent to program, nor will it auto transition out at the end or queue up the next item. The sound media player is almost identical to the others, but doesn't have the autoplay feature as this isn't an available source to switch to and is designed to play in the background. To trigger playback for files within this media player, simply use the playhead controls. By hovering the mouse cursor over the edge of any of the media players, a small flyout menu will appear with 12 slots. These are known as presets and allow you to store and separate content for that particular media player, which can be useful for organising media for playout across your broadcast. The system also comes packed with pre-created graphical templates for users to use during their broadcasts. Within one of the graphics media players, go to Add Content in the same way that you did before. This time, from within the media browser, under the category for titles, we have a long list of different themes that contain a range of different types of graphics, from lower thirds to scoreboards. With this added to my graphics player, when I hover over the item, this icon appears within the thumbnail, which when clicked opens a floating window allowing me to change the content of that graphic. If I have more than one of this type of graphic, so in this case multiple lower thirds that are to be played out across my broadcast, I can quickly create a new version of this by hitting Save and Duplicate, which can then be edited straight away. As mentioned already for your other media, it's important that you then order these correctly to make operation during the broadcast easier. Providing this graphics player is then assigned to a DSK, which we'll cover in the next section, this can then be overlaid on top of your feed. Notice though, that when this is sent to program, the playhead will play through the clip, but upon reaching the end, the item will stay on screen until we take it off. However, with autoplay turned on for this graphics player, it has now queued up the next item in the playlist. We're now going to look at how you perform basic operation using the live control area within the GUI. The two identical rows within this panel represent the main switch bus and control what is shown on preview and program. Selected feeds along the program row are highlighted in red and green on the preview. These buttons correspond to all the various sources that you can mix between and are distributed across two banks, which can be switched between here. Selecting items directly on the program row will immediately place that feed on program out. This is referred to as hot punching. However, it is usually advised that you preview the feed that you wish to cut to next to avoid any potential issues or mistakes, such as problems with camera feeds or having the wrong media file queued up. Once you have a feed selected on preview, you then need to transition to it, which can be done via these transition controls. The virtual T-bar allows you to manually perform an animated transition between what is on preview, also referred to as the background video layer, and program. Notice that when the transition has occurred, the feeds just simply swap over and will continue to do so until something else is selected on the preview row. Below the T-bar, we also have buttons for carrying out transitions. The Auto button will carry out an animated transition at a set speed, which is the recommended method as opposed to the T-bar, as this provides more consistent results and has less room for error. What transition these methods use is decided by what is selected within the transition palette located here, where we have 9 slots. Slots 1 and 2 are set default transitions, slot 1 being a straight cut and slot 2 being a crossfade. However, slots 3 through 9 can be swapped out for other transitions loaded onto the system. To do this, hover over one of the slots and click the plus symbol to open the media browser. Then on the left, select one of the categories under Transitions or Animation Stores. Once you've found a transition that you would like to use, simply select it and hit OK. That is then loaded into that particular slot within the palette. With that selected, when we now use either the T-bar or the Auto button, that transition is used to swap the two feeds. The Take button, unlike Auto, just carries out a straight cut between the two selected feeds. Which method of transition you use really depends on what you think visually looks the best when switching between program and preview. Normally when switching between cameras, a straight cut is preferred, as it is instant so you can quickly react to whoever is talking on a particular camera. When transitioning between scenes though, an animated transition, be it a simple crossfade or custom designed one or a combination of different ones, is preferable, as it helps to symbolise and show a change in location, but is also more visually appealing. To the right of the transition controls, we then have our control area for our 4 downstream keys, or in short, DSKs. These DSKs sit above our background video layer, which remember is our preview row, and allows us to overlay elements such as graphics on top of our feed. These are ordered so DSK 1 sits under 2, which sits under 3, with 4 sitting at the top. What these DSKs are assigned to is controlled via the drop-down box above each of their monitors, where we have a list of all of our available sources. These layers can also be transitioned on and off independently via the buttons underneath each of their monitors. The left button opens the transition palette for that DSK, and when one is selected, the button to the right of that will then carry out that transition to bring on that layer. Finally, we can also have multiple layers selected to transition on at the same time using the main transition controls. Simply select the name for that layer to highlight it, and then when we use either the Take or Auto buttons along with the T-bar, it will then transition all of those selected layers together. It is important that you are aware of this, as accidentally deselecting the background layer can cause confusion and issues during your broadcast. So if you wish to swap what is going to be appearing on screen via the preview row, ensure that the background layer is selected. Now we've covered how we perform basic operation of the mixer via the live control area within the GUI, we'll now expand on that and look at how we can control the mixer using the 2-stripe control surface. As the name suggests, the control surface is divided into 2 stripes, which are nearly identical. These stripes allow us to control the different buses within the mixer at the same time, which consist of our main program preview rows, MEs, and mix outputs. What each strip is controlling is indicated by the LED displays over on the left. If you wish to change what a stripe is assigned to, along the bottom stripe, there is a Delegate Stripe button, which when held down will then display across both LED strips all of the different options. Simply press the button underneath the LED display for the desired switch bus. Because the lower stripe is closer to us and therefore more dominant, we will have this assigned to our main switcher for easier operation. Across the LED display, we can then see all of our connected sources that have been set up within the loaded session. Not all of them can be seen though, so to see these we can switch between banks 1, 2 and 3 via these buttons, which will change what is shown on the LED display. Much like the live control area within the GUI, we have two rows of buttons for controlling what is seen on preview and program. This top row represents the program and the bottom the preview. Illuminated buttons highlight what source is selected. To make a change to what is shown on program or preview, simply select the button below the source name on the LED display. Over here, we then have buttons for delegating what layers are selected for transition when we use either take or auto. With background selected, only what I have selected along the preview row will be transitioned. If I wish to have multiple layers transition on and off at the same time, then I can multi-select those by pressing the corresponding buttons at the same time. Below that, I have the ability to quickly switch between the default crossfade and the last selected transition loaded into one of the additional 7 slots of the transition palette. If you wish to change to a different transition within the palette, then you can do this by holding down the Effect button, which will then change the information seen along the LED display to show the names for each of the loaded transitions. You can kill your program feed quickly by using the Fade to Black option, located in both the GUI and on the control surface. This fades both preview and program to black and fades out all audio. To do this via the control surface, hold down the Shift button and hit the FDB key. Pressing both again will then fade in your picture and sound to what is selected on program. Hitting the FTB key on its own will cause it to flash along with the Shift key to indicate that both need to be pressed at the same time in order for it to work. The rate dial will allow you to adjust the speed of the transition when auto is used. This can be seen within the transition thumbnail when it is adjusted. We then have the physical version of the T-bar. Again, this allows us to perform the specified transition manually. However, if you do decide to use this, then ensure the bar is pushed fully to the top or pulled all the way down to the bottom, so that the transition has completed fully. Failure to do this can cause issues to arise. For example, when using the default crossfade, failing to carry out the transition fully causes a ghosting effect, where the previous shot is still slightly visible. If gone unnoticed, selecting a feed in preview also changes what is seen on program, which in turn leads to panic and further error. The T-bar includes an LED light which will change colour as the transition is carried out. Once completed, it then reverts back to red. Next, we have take and auto buttons for each of our downstream keys, which allow us to independently control when they go on and off. Finally, we then have our media player controls. Along the top, we have a delegate for assigning which media player is being controlled. The selected content within that media player is then displayed on the LED display, giving us the name and remaining duration, as well as some other information. We can also adjust the in and out points for the clip by using the mark in and out buttons within this area. We then have our playback controls for playing and stopping content, as well as buttons for skipping through our content within the playlist. And then in the bottom corner are buttons for switching on and off loop, single or playlist mode, and autoplay. We also have a show button which will transition that selected media player onto program with whatever item is queued up. Pressing the button again will transition out to whatever is selected on preview. We can interact with our recording features using the control surface via these keys here. To do this, you will first need to disengage the number lock, which is on by default when you load into a session. With this turned off, I can now use key 9, labelled as record, to start recording. If I hit the record key again to stop recording, that key along with the shift key will flash to indicate that both need to be pressed at the same time. This is to prevent you from accidentally stopping the recording during a broadcast. Once you've finished recording your broadcast, as mentioned earlier, it is advised that you transcode and export out your recording due to the format that the system records in being quite large. To do this, click on the cog icon for export along the dashboard to access the settings. where we can configure any already created presets, or we can create new ones. Select the cog icon for H.264, which is what we recommend you use. Within this window, I can check the file directory for where the file will be exported to. If you already have a storage device plugged into the Vision Mixer via the USB sockets on the front of the unit, these need to be formatted as FAT32 or NTFS to be recognised. You can then choose that as your destination. Otherwise, you can temporarily set the file path to the exports folder within the E drive. It's important that you remember to back up any recordings and exports once you are finished, as these will be cleared off the system regularly to avoid the drives filling up. Click the cog icon again for export and select Export Media from the top of the list. Within this window, we now need to add our recordings that we wish to transcode and export. Go to Add, then under Clips, select your session name, where you should then be able to see your recording listed over here. Select the clip or clips and hit OK. From this window, you can then trim the file down if required. Once happy, you then just hit Export.